Welcome back for the third session of the day. Teamwork Arts, in association with the Asia Society New York, welcomes you to this session of JLF New York Virtual Festival. I'm Rachel Cooper. I'm the Director of Culture as Diplomacy at the Asia Society. The Bhutto Dynasty, the struggle for power in Pakistan, Owen Bennett-Jones and Husain Haqqani, in conversation with TCA Raghavan. Journalist and author Owen Bennett-Jones' new book, The Bhutto Dynasty, The Struggle for Power in Pakistan, is a vivid account of the deeply rooted influence and journey of one of Pakistan's most powerful families. Drawing on research and unpublished documents spanning across more than 2 decades, he explores the turbulent years of political power and personal loss that have long overshadowed the Bhuttos. Jones is also the writer of Pakistan, Eye of the Storm, and Target Britain. Husain Haqqani is Pakistan's former ambassador to Sri Lanka and the United States, and was previously Benazir Bhutto's spokesperson. He is currently the Senior Fellow and Director for South and Central Asia at the Hudson Institute. In a conversation with diplomat and author TCA Raghavan, they will discuss the political and social landscape that led to the rise of the Bhutto dynasty and the legacy they left behind. Owen Bennett-Jones has reported for the BBC from over 60 countries. He is the author of Pakistan, Eye of the Storm. Bennett-Jones has won journalism prizes and written for the Financial Times, The Guardian, Dawn, and the London Review of Books, among others. Husain Haqqani is a prominent Pakistani public intellectual, currently Senior Fellow and Director for South and Central Asia at the Hudson Institute. He served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States and Sri Lanka, and has retired. And TCA Raghavan has retired from the Indian Foreign Service and is the former High Commissioner to Pakistan and Singapore. He is the author of Attendant Lords, Bairam Khan and Abdur Rahim, Courtiers and Poets in Mughal India, The People Next Door, The Curious History of India's Relations with Pakistan, and History Men, Jagannath Sarkar, G.S. Sardesai, and Raghuvar Singh, and their quest for India's past. He is currently Director General of the India Council of World Affairs, a foreign policy think tank recognized by an act of parliament as an institution of national importance. We are delighted to have Lanchora as the podcast partner for this session. This conversation will be followed by a Q&A session, and please feel free to send in your questions. All of our sessions will be available to view on Facebook and YouTube. Do follow our pages at JLF LitFest across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook to be notified of upcoming sessions, and stay tuned to the JLF LitFest.org/New York for the full schedule and for upcoming programs. In these unusually difficult times, we've struggled to bring you JLF New York without charging registration fee. Please donate as generously as you can to ensure the support that we so depend on and the continuous flow of knowledge. You can donate to us on our website at jlflitfest.org. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bhutto Dynasty, the struggle for power in Pakistan. Mr. Raghavan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you very much, JLF, for inviting me and for putting this panel together. It's a pleasure to be with Owen Bennett-Jones and Husain Haqqani, and may I begin by congratulating you, Owen Bennett-Jones, on a wonderful book, very easy to read, but full of detail, and does not try to reduce the complexity of the subject at all. The book has already been introduced, so let me talk to you a little bit about what is possibly the most dramatic bit in the book, which is towards the end of the dynasty, or the end of the current history of the dynasty, and that is the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. And you say at one point, that her death was a kind of act of redemption, and it must be taken into account when evaluating her legacy. So my question really is, what exactly is Benazir Bhutto's legacy in terms of the long-term impact she has had on Pakistan, on Pakistani politics, but also on her own party and on the future of South Asia? And I'll try to bring in Husain Haqqani with a slightly different question, a variant of this question, after your answer.
Well, she stood for a particular type of politics in Pakistan. She was seen as a very pro-American voice, but she was a liberal voice in the context of Pakistani politics, which was perhaps more important in terms of her domestic impact. But the truth is that her governments didn't really succeed. I mean, she had two governments which were brought to an end early. She had huge difficulties in the first government getting anything through the bureaucratic and military system. In the second government, she tried to cooperate with the military, seeing how obstructive they'd been the first time round, but it didn't prove easy. And she was very young and not very experienced, and it wasn't easy for her to govern at that stage of her life. So in terms of her political achievements, I'm sure she would have agreed that she didn't achieve as much as she hoped when she started out at the beginning of that first term. But I think probably her legacy, the important aspect of her life for Pakistan, was what she stood for, that she was a voice, a liberal voice in the context of Pakistani politics. She stood, of course, as a woman in a country where many women don't get the opportunity to participate in public life. And she did make a substantial contribution in those ways. Now, her legacy was obviously, the financial issues, the corruption issues were there, and that was part of the story. But I think when she went to her death, facing the Taliban, knowing that this threat was there, she'd been warned just hours before that it was coming. She'd been blown up a few weeks before in Karachi, and 140 people died that day. She knew the threat and she accepted it, and it was a magnificent act of bravery. She was quite fatalistic about it, but she did accept her fate, and she died, I think, a magnificent death, redeeming some of the parts of her legacy that she'd have been disappointed in.
Husain Haqqani, would you agree? And also, if I may ask, how deeply was a liberal Pakistan impacted by her premature removal from the political scene, so to say?
So I'll start with two anecdotes. The first is from the 1993 election campaign of Benazir Bhutto. I had not been on Benazir Bhutto's side in the 1990 and 1988 campaigns, but I was by her side in the 1993 election campaign and virtually was managing it. And so I happened to be in Larkana, her home base. Now she had been in office for 2 years and had been unceremoniously dismissed. Her husband had been put on trial. She had faced a lot of tribulation through that period, and she was going to the people again. So I just decided, the journalist in me, since I started my career as a journalist, made me ask a few questions of people just to get an idea and a feel. This was the first time I was in Larkana with her. So I went around and there was a bunch of women who were cheering for her, and I went and started talking to them. And I asked them, well, what do you think Benazir Bhutto has done for you? And one of them said something that has stayed with me all these years. She said, he doesn't have to do anything. He just has to be. And I said, what do you mean? She said, now that Pakistan has had a woman prime minister, I can occasionally talk back to my husband who used to beat me all the time before. And I might actually even divorce him because I have the courage to do that because she has become prime minister. She's one of us in the sense that she was a Sindhi, she was from that area. And that, I think, is something people don't fully understand. You see, the intellectual class intellectualizes everything, whereas politics always has a visceral dimension. And so as a Pakistani liberal, I can tell you that a lot of Pakistani liberals felt comforted by the fact that the mainstream of Pakistani politics had a figure who by and large agreed with them. Now, the other anecdote is from Asma Jahangir, the really intellectual, legal icon of resistance in Pakistan to both the religious right and to the military. And she had a very different view of Benazir Bhutto than the drawing room classes of Pakistan do. She said, again, the same thing. She said that by having her in the mainstream of Pakistani politics as a major contender for power, all of us derive strength, because it means, on the one hand, that it's not all Muslim League's center-right politics, it's not all the military's dominance, and it's not all the mullahs and their role in the running of affairs. There is an alternative. Now, why has that alternative not been sufficiently well defined? Why were there failings in the two stints in government she had with all the restrictions and limitations? I think that has been discussed by Owen in this book, but also in his previous book, Pakistan, Eye of the Storm. And in all of my books, I have explained in great detail of what the limitations of any political actor in Pakistan are. Benazir Bhutto's father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, had a relatively freer hand, but even that hand was not entirely free. He got his relatively free hand because of the bifurcation of Pakistan and the loss of East Pakistan, and the fact that the military had surrendered in Dhaka and was at the lowest of its standing ever in Pakistani history. But the way Pakistan has been Pakistan has been created and evolved, there are limitations on any liberal force in the country, and Benazir Bhutto faced all those limitations. And then, of course, as Owen points out in the book, created some limitations for herself. There are those who argue, unrealistically, in my opinion, that for any political leader to succeed against the military in Pakistan, that leader would have to be extremely honest and above board. Basically, that only an angel can defeat the military. And I think that is just with due apologies to Owen, just the desire of journalists and intellectuals, which doesn't happen in the real world. The real world does involve having political activists who, after years and years of being in prison, when they have this 2 or 3 year stint in power, they want to make up for it and make sure that their children are provided for and their families are provided for. Did Benazir Bhutto look the other way when that was happening? Did she let some people very close to her, including her husband, engage in it and indulge in it? I think that has to be seen in the context of the overall political limitations that are imposed on Pakistan by its very nature of being a quasi-Islamic state, even in the most liberal of its moments.
So just by being there, she made a difference. But if I could extend that logic, Owen Bennett-Jones, and go a little beyond your book, extending that logic, how much of the Benazir Bhutto legacy do you feel would devolve on someone like Maryam Nawaz Sharif today? She's a woman. She's very much in the thick of Pakistani politics, in the midst of a pretty serious optical standoff, at least with the military and so on. So do you think her just being there also makes a statement?
Well, you could look at Maryam Nawaz as a successor in the sense that she's a young woman who's defying the establishment and is making these fiery speeches and attempting to, carve out her generation's popular base from what she's inherited from her father. So there are obviously parallels, but the fact is that the Bhutto operation is a family operation, and the PPP is the vehicle for that operation, and the inheritor of it is Bilal Bhutto now. And he is obviously ambitious, and he is trying to make a pitch for power, and he's doing his rallies and he's doing his politics, and he's making maybe some adjustments with the establishment, as his mother and grandfather did before him, in order to achieve that. So I think really the inheritor is Bilal Bhutto, although I'm sure Maryam Nawaz would pay due homage to Benazir in terms of clearing the way for women like her to be going out barnstorming around the country doing their politics.
Would you agree, Husain Haqqani, with this?
Look, Maryam Nawaz Sharif obviously is treading a path that Benazir Bhutto carved out. And in that sense, she has an advantage. But she also has another advantage, which is that the entire political machine that her father has built was built essentially with the establishment's cooperation, whereas Benazir Bhutto had to build a political machine in defiance of the establishment. Huge difference, huge difference. Landed aristocracy, but not with the kind of cash flow that comes from having a business and industrial empire that Nawaz Sharif's family had. So those are differences, and people do notice those differences. Furthermore, the political party that she presides over, Maryam Nawaz Sharif, is essentially a conservative party. And so she may be a liberal anti-establishment voice, but she's presiding over an essentially pro-establishment or generally soft on the establishment or establishment generated party. So that will limit her ability to confront the establishment long term. The PPP, on the other hand, while it is a Bhutto family operation, as Owen Bennett-Jones rightly pointed out now, was not always that. The PPP was essentially a coalition of some landed Sindhi politicians, but in Punjab and elsewhere, it was the party of the left and the center left, and a lot of leftist intellectuals and student leaders and labor leaders populated that party. The fact that it became a dynastic party, in my opinion, was purely the result of the judicial assassination of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who died very young. The party may have become a self-generating party if General Ziaul Haq had not slammed it down and not killed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto the way he did. And Benazir Bhutto said this to me in many of our conversations, that very frankly, the thing that impeded her from making, I said, well, what's the problem in having elections within the party, at least at lower levels, if not at the top? And she said, I would do that, but I am afraid that the establishment will manipulate those elections to put in people who will not be loyal to either me or to the party's ideal. And that reality is sometimes forgotten. The amount of manipulation. I mean, there were times when, cabinet ministers were reporting on what was happening in cabinet to the intelligence services and things like that. So
I've no doubt Husain knows things happen, but that's quite a generous interpretation of it. I mean, in the first meeting of the founding meeting of the PPP, it was decided that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto would have all power over all appointments.
Sure.
And so from the beginning, it was a family affair. Bhutto.
It wasn't a family affair because there was no family at that time. The children were very young. It was a Zulfikar Ali Bhutto affair, and yes, that is definitely there.
And when he passed over the leadership to his wife, there was an opportunity to not do that and to pass it over to very.
I do not agree. I do not agree, and I do not agree because I was there, not in the mainstream of things, but I was very much there. Look, the Ziaul Haq years were very brutal, and the reason why he passed it on to his wife was essentially because 3 of his lieutenants were already hobnobbing with the military, and later on it was proved that they all were in bed with the military. Each one of them was brought back into political office by the military in various caretaker governments. Mr. Jatoi, Mr. Khar, and Mr. Pirzada, all 3 of them. And so Bhutto, while being in prison, one must give him credit that he actually knew his lieutenants and knew which ones would immediately cut deals with Ziaul Haq. And all of these people ended up being either in London or somewhere else on the day of his execution. So none of them stood up, and his wife was going to stand up for whatever he told her to stand up for. So those are realities which I think are sometimes ignored, partly because, and look, I'm not being critical here, I'm actually praising you and your work by pointing out that journalists do have and I've been one in my life, we have a tendency to look at things in an ideal framework and sometimes gloss over the realistic difficulties. Now, could it have been a more ideal outcome, and could he have passed on the leadership to somebody who had The qualities of being able to resist the military as well as be loyal to him, maybe. But I don't think that he could find somebody like that under the circumstances that he had. Secondly, you must remember, while being in prison, awaiting execution, the only people he could actually meet were his family members. And so therefore, if you are going to be in prison and yet have some political influence, the way to do it would be through family members. That's not saying that he didn't want or wouldn't have set up a dynasty anyway, and maybe if he had lived another 25 years, he would have still passed it on to his children, who knows? But I'm saying that as Pakistan's history has evolved, there were very specific limitations and circumstances that in which one thing led to another. And that's how I read it or choose to read it.
Well, there'll never be a consensus, but I do recall some very revealing conversations which Owen has in his book between Mubashir Hassan and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, when Mubashir Hassan is saying precisely this is a time when you have to make a stand and not compromise and so on. And I think Zulfikar Ali Bhutto says it's no longer possible. But let me, while staying on Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, go on to a period when he was, in fact, seemed to be working in tandem with the military establishment. And now next year is going to be 50 years since a very important year in Pakistan's history, which is 1971 and the emergence of Bangladesh. And your very harsh Owen Bennett-Jones, if I may say, on Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's role in 1969, 1970, and 1971. And while you do give him a great deal of credit for what he did post-1971 in terms of reconciling the Pakistani people to a very bitter reality, nevertheless, his role in 70 and 71, you're pretty harsh about. Do you feel that he was simply trying to then play along with the military to get the best possible deal for himself?
For himself, for West Pakistan as well, although I think it was Mubashir Hassan, someone close to him made the point, which I thought did ring true, that the surprising thing about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the run-up to 71 was that he just didn't realize what was going to happen, and that he didn't quite clock that separation was possible and likely, and the outcome that eventually happened. And therefore, he didn't respond appropriately to the crisis. He didn't see the severity of the crisis. So that is in the book, and it is quite a favorable point from Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's. I mean, it's a lack of strategic judgment maybe, but it doesn't fit in with the story that it was all just for his own self-interest that he wanted to become the leader, and he was prepared to sacrifice the country for that. I mean, I think it's also worth making the point, which I did, that, you know, there were three people involved in this. So you know, even though it's Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was very much one of them, there were two others who, you know, in Mujibur Rahman's case, handled it very well from his point of view, and from Yaya's case, handled it disastrously. So it wasn't, you know, there were three. It was a three-way dance. This, and it wasn't all on one person. But certainly, when he, you know, he made decisions in the course of those events which did not, as you look back on it, help Pakistan keep it together. Whether it was ever possible to keep it together, yeah, very unlikely, and certainly not. I mean, maybe that year, maybe, but not in the long term. And so I don't think I'm quite as harsh as you're suggesting.
But it was a strategic lack of judgment. And Husain Haqqani, what would your interpretation of events be?
First of all, I mean, look, I'm not one of those who believes that, you know, three people were responsible for it. I think millions of people were responsible for it. There was a West Pakistan attitude. There's a West Pakistan point of view. I was a high school student at that time, but among my class fellows, I think I was a lone person who, because of my father's influence on me, who actually questioned that, you know, the treatment that many of us meted out to Bengalis at a visceral level. There was a general disdain and disregard for them, and the West Pakistani elite was hostile to Bengalis. So the fact of the matter is that the politics of the time has to be taken into account. And look, I have respect for Dr. Mubashir Hassan, But I have always thought that he's one of those people who got bitter towards the end of his life. And bitter because he was an intellectual who had latched onto a populist political figure. And he had hoped that the deal would be that it would be Mubashir Hassan's brains and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's popularity, and that'll change Pakistan and bring about revolution. He wrote a book about that, by the way, when he was made Secretary General of the party, a book that Bhutto launched and smiled about. And in his book, Mubashir Hassan actually talks about that, while the book was, Bhutto had no, because Bhutto was not a Marxist. Mubashir Hassan was. So here were all these Marxist and Communist Party, former Communist Party members, etc., who had joined the PPP in the hope of taking over a PPP, and Bhutto thwarted them. And he thwarted them partly with the help of the establishment. But we must understand the difference between revolutionary idealists and a politician who started his career by joining Ayub Khan's military government. So he actually he had some liberal instincts, but he was definitely not going to be a radical for all these people. As far as the East Pakistan, West Pakistan situation is concerned, it's very important to listen to some of the Bengalis who engaged with the PPP team at that time and other West Pakistani leaders. One of such people is Mr. Rahman Subhan, who was an intellectual who came to West Pakistan to meet everybody and sound out everybody on behalf of Mujibur Rahman. And he came to the Hudson Institute not long ago because he had published a book. And so we had a conversation. In fact, it's available online. And he explained how people like Mahmood Ali Kusuri, who was held in great esteem by a lot of people for being a leftist lawyer and all that, even those people actually were supportive of the military because they believed that Mujibur Rahman now was on the verge of breaking up Pakistan with India's help. Now, in Pakistan, the sentiment that has been generated, especially in the Punjabi elite, but also in the rest of the elite about India, those of us who have broken with that sentiment and have dared to argue differently know the price you pay for saying, you know what, stop this business about India being an eternal enemy. But others who are in mainstream Pakistani politics, when it comes to India, always try to hedge their bets. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto did that too. And he had a good functioning relationship with the military and had hoped that the military will hand over power to him. And if they will only do a power sharing, he was willing to do it at that time. But things went out of control because the military didn't even acquit itself very well in the military realm in East Pakistan. They got it all wrong. And so therefore, circumstances really did dictate the course of events. And Bhutto was asked to pick up the pieces, which I think he did admirably, because at that time, very frankly, Sindh was going to remain with Bhutto, but Baluchistan and Pashtunkhwa could have gone a different way. And to this day, the Baluch and Pashtun nationalists are upset with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto for not letting that happen and instead keeping Pakistan together. So question is, if you are somebody who starts believing in the project of Pakistan, as Zulfikar Ali Bhutto clearly did, believes, and I have written this in my book with great quotes from Bhutto and from various conversations, etc., Bhutto at heart was a Pakistani nationalist, and he was a Pakistani nationalist who bought into the Pakistani national narrative, which essentially is Islam keeps us together, India is our eternal enemy, and very frankly, various ethnic groups in Pakistan must give in to a Pakistani identity. And so because he believed that, it was natural for him to side with the military rather than Mujibur Rahman.
Well, another subject we can discuss at great length, but we have 5 minutes before we go to audience questions. But Owen Bennett-Jones, there's one element in your book with which I disagreed, and this is about the third generation, Bilawal Bhutto, and you say towards the end something to the effect that the two important issues which will influence Bilawal Bhutto's future will be his relationship with the military, which I think most would agree, but also you say his relationships with the West. Do you think you're giving too much importance to the relationship with the West, especially because of the role which China now plays and will continue to play in Pakistan?
Well, the decline of Western power is evident. I mean, it's a question of how rapid it is, I guess. His great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his mother all dealt with Western powers to secure their own route to power to some extent. Zulfikar much less than the others, but that has been an aspect of the family's history, and they have taken it seriously, and they have worked it very well. So will America remain as powerful a force in Pakistan in the next, well, I suppose we're talking next 10 years, as it has in the past? You know, not as powerful, I'm sure, partly because of geostrategic situation, and partly because, as Husain Haqqani was saying just before we came on, you know, everyone's slightly tired of Pakistan. They've sort of had enough. So their role in Pakistani politics is probably not as active as it was. But I still think that the family do see Washington as an important place where they can wield influence and secure friends who are able to be influential with the Pakistan army. And that is one channel amongst many others, and maybe you're right, a diminishing channel, but nonetheless a channel which they need in order to secure power.
Husain Haqqani, what do you think? With the Biden presidency, will the United States continue to have a major influence in Pakistan, or do you think that era is now over and the Chinese influence is going to be the predominant one?
I think that the Chinese influence is predominant, but it's a different kind of influence. And Chinese influence is not going to be about managing Pakistan's democracy. It's going to be about managing Pakistan's establishment. But the fact remains that Owen is right, that to the extent that America is influential in Pakistan, it always helps democratic political forces and interacts with them. President-elect Joe Biden has always been of the view that Pakistan should have democracy, and the democratic political forces are better for American interests than direct military rule. That has been his consistent position even in the Musharraf years, when the Bush administration supported General Musharraf unconditionally for a while. So in that sense, it is better for Bilawal Bhutto Zardari to have Joe Biden in the White House than anybody else. But I am of the considered view that the old style of American influence is just no longer viable. Pakistan is not going to receive the large amounts of military and economic assistance it's used to get from the United States. And India is America's new partner in South Asia, not Pakistan. So because of all those factors, America's footprint will be considerably diminished. But to the extent that there is a footprint, it will definitely be supportive of the political ambitions of more liberal political actors, among which Bilawal Bhutto Zardari will definitely feature.
Well, we've already got a question, but before I come to that, let me ask one final point which intrigued me greatly. And you talk, when you sum up about the Bhutto dynasty, Owen, you say that the story of the dynasty is largely a story of conflict between it and the army, and also of failed attempts to reach a compromise with the army. So would you summarize the history of politics in Pakistan as attempts to reach compromises and at the same time a story of failures? Or do you think there's something more to be said about Pakistani politics today?
Well, there's more than that to be said, but it is a very important element that these civilian politicians, I think, I mean, they did make compromises with the military. Zulfikar Bhutto started his career with the military, and Benazir Bhutto, particularly in her second government, was bending over backwards to please the military. But it's never been enough. I mean, apart from the Zardari presidency, it's never been enough for anyone to satisfy the military. So, I think there was a desire and a sort of pragmatism to find an accommodation, which just never worked out. And let's face it, I mean, Zulfikar Bhutto was hanged by a military government. Benazir Bhutto met her death. It's not clear what role the establishment played in it, but I think it's widely accepted they probably played some role in it. And so they've paid with their lives for this failure to fashion a way of actually working with the establishment in Pakistan. So is there more to Pakistani politics than that? Of course there is, but it is a central theme, and it's also obviously affected their political opponents as well. And it is, I guess, the dominant feature of Pakistani politics.
I'll turn to you, Husain Haqqani, but let me pose this question to you, Owen, which has just come in. Very interesting question from Jeffrey Balkind, a retiree from the World Bank. He was in an aircraft PK-326 in March 1981, which was hijacked by Murtaza Bhutto. The hijacking lasted for 13 days. And his question is, and it's addressed to you, what did Benazir know about this ordeal, both beforehand and afterwards? And he was a hostage in that aircraft for 13 days.
Yes, I'm aware of Jeffrey Balkind having been a hostage on the plane, and I've actually been doing a lot of work on this. How much did Benazir know? The answer is, I think she did not know, but she had made an appeal to her brothers in Kabul in the weeks before the hijack not to do any big operation, because there were talks between the PPP and other opposition parties which she didn't want to disrail at that particular moment. So I don't think she was aware that it was coming, but she had asked them to postpone, not to do anything while these talks were on. And then it is my understanding, I'm pretty sure about this, that Murtaza Bhutto did actually call off the hijacking. He sent a message to Karachi saying that he wanted it called off. The chap who actually did the hijacking was already in Karachi preparing it by that stage. He received a phone call to say, stop it. I've spoken to the person who made the phone call. And he then murdered someone on Karachi University campus and ended up needing an escape route out of Pakistan, and revived on the sort of spur of the moment the hijacking plan that he'd already had in mind. So it's quite a complicated story. I'm actually doing a 10-part podcast series on it, so you'll be able to get the full details.
Ambassador Haqqani, let me ask the next question, which is from Regina, and she's asking both of you, how do you see Pakistan's future in a post-pandemic political climate? How has been their situation in terms of foreign aid and emergency healthcare?
Well, Pakistan has done okay in the COVID pandemic. It hasn't had the kind of disaster that some countries have had. That said, we do not really know, because government figures are hard to trust, and circumstances we don't know if some of the deaths that have taken place in the last several months are because of COVID or because of other reasons. And the economy has definitely suffered significantly, and the economy's recovery is not going to be easy. And as far as dependence on external assistance is concerned, Pakistan has over the years become so dependent on external assistance in many, many ways that it is going to end up having to figure out who is left untapped internationally, because the IMF and other financial institutions will always lend on a conditional basis. The Saudis and the UAE will not continue to write indefinite large checks indefinitely if they do not serve and advance their own interests. China has a geostrategic reason to continue to support Pakistan, and the United States and the Western countries, as we all know, have become more or less exhausted. So there's aid fatigue. So Pakistan is going to definitely enter choppy waters, its economy, its polity. Right now, we all know that the opposition has got together in the Pakistan Democratic Movement to challenge Imran Khan. Imran Khan's government has proved to be particularly inept and incompetent in more ways than one, as civilian governments go in Pakistan. And for once, it can't even say that the establishment tied its hands down, because it's totally in bed with the establishment. So its failures are its own. And conventional wisdom based on whatever opinion polling Pakistan has, seems to be that if there is another election in the near future, it will be won by the opposition. Even in the last election, the PPP and the PML vote together was far greater than Imran Khan's party's vote. And this time, if they actually do seat sharing, the PMLN doesn't put up candidates against PPP candidates in Sindh and other areas where PPP is strong, and the Saraiki belt of Punjab, then the opposition could do very well. But will they be able to implement a plan for Pakistan's future that is acceptable to the establishment and that is also practicable? We do not know. Here's the problem. The Pakistani establishment has tied Pakistan down to a particular narrative of what it means to be Pakistani. It has also closed down all avenues for regional and ethnic and nationalistic aspirations of various groups that constitute Pakistan, many of whom have very serious histories as independent or sovereign entities long before the emergence of Pakistan. Economically, Pakistan's human capital base is relatively weak. A large number of school-going age children do not go to school. Pakistan has the second largest out-of-school population in the world. And so with a poor human capital base, an elite economy, and a overwhelming military, which needs a lot of resources, basically, what is the way forward for a political government which does not have full cooperation of the establishment unless it acquiesces completely to what the establishment wants, is a recipe for constant crisis.
Constant crisis. I think that sums it up very well. We have time for one final question, and let me put it to you, Owen Bennett-Jones. What are your views on dynastic politics? And certainly in Pakistan, we have the politics of dynasty, not just within the PPP, but now clearly also in other parties, most prominently the PMLN. How would you see the future of dynastic politics, especially given the role of the military in Pakistan today?
Well, I mean, it's not just the PMLN, it's virtually every party except perhaps Jamaat Islami. Well, many of them have dynastic elements to them. I was obviously very interested to think about that while writing the book, and was struck that values that are associated with one generation don't necessarily get passed down. I mean, you think, for instance, the attitude towards minorities, which is one of the hallmark themes of PPP politics. In fact, the great-grandfather was not very generous towards the Hindu minority, which I was quite surprised to read. So that was a Zulfikar Bhutto innovation, if you like. So these values can change over the generations. Have they delivered more than elected politicians who are not chosen from the ranks of his family? I mean, I think it's quite hard to say they have. They certainly have an enduring appeal, and people. I mean, it's not just in Pakistan. Obviously, it's in the United States. It's in many places that these values, these associations from one generation to the next, seem to endure. But can you really argue that the successive generations have delivered more than politicians who come from other backgrounds? I don't. When I looked at it, I just don't think you can make that case.
Thank you very much. I think we have run out of time, and may I thank both Ambassador Husain Haqqani and Owen Bennett-Jones for joining us on this panel. And thank you very much, JLF, for putting us together to have this fascinating conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Owen Bennett-Jones and Husain Haqqani, for a fascinating session, and one that not only brings us in depth to Pakistan, but I think pushes us to think about dynasties and political histories across borders and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Raghavan, for being such an insightful moderator. This has really been a terrific session. And thank you all for watching and being a great audience. We encourage you to buy the books of our speakers that are available through Full Circle. And once again, we would like to thank all our partners for their support. We hope you all enjoyed this conversation and will tune in to our next session, Elegy to Epic, Reimagining the Landscape of Poetry, Vijay Seshadri and Ranjit Hosko, in conversation with Sampurna Chatterjee. Thank you again, and now we present a reading from the Jaipur Writers Short Series.
Stop it! Don't cover them with makeup, how much ever ugly they are. They are my blessings. This was while I was shooting for my first movie. I almost got fired because of the scars on my arms. But here I am now, at the pinnacle of my career. People have made countless theories about how I got these scars and why I call them my blessing. Some have related them to my modest background. But nobody has checked with people in my hometown yet. Someday they will check and they will get the version which is famous in my hometown. But I don't care. Me and my scars. I will never reveal the secret because the secret is not mine to reveal. It is my ma's secret. Dear diary, you are the only one who will ever know this secret. I was 8 years old. I remember the day as if it happened yesterday. I was playing with my dolls in a corner of my house when suddenly I heard ma's shouts. I looked up and saw the sight I will never forget. My ma was sitting with her hair open, flying all around her face. Her eyes were bloodshot. She was banging her wrists on the floor. She was shouting and screaming and making weird hand gestures. My grandma gave her a tight slap. And ma, she slapped her back. Oh my God, what was happening? The dutiful daughter-in-law and a dutiful wife who had never raised her voice against my father or my grandma was fighting back. It went on, the shouting, the screaming, but my grandma was too scared to go near her again. We lived in a tiny house with paper-thin walls. Soon, our neighbors gathered to see what was happening. The show was still on. The shouting and screaming continued. Kali Ma has entered her body. One of the neighboring aunties came with a coconut and touched Ma's feet. Ma gave her blessings. Soon, everybody knelt in front of her, even my hateful grandma. I just stood there, taking everything in. That evening, my alcoholic father came home and raised his hand to beat Ma. It was his hobby, but grandma stopped him. You cannot beat her now. Kali Ma has entered her body today. My father vented out all his anger on me. I was showered with slaps, beatings, pushes and whatnots. Ma tried to stop him, but he was too strong. Ma cried like never before. My dear child, it is all my fault. I never intended this to happen. I promise tomorrow I will make it better. The next afternoon, all neighbors had gathered at our house. They were now devotees of Kali Ma. They were devotees of my Ma. In front of everyone, she put scalding hot coals on both my arms. It was pain, agony. She had said she will make everything better, and here she was harming me. I was traumatized, hurt, and in a bad shape. That night, when my father came to beat me, Grandma stopped him. Wait, you cannot beat her either. She has been blessed with Kali Ma. She showed him my scars. I could not believe my ears. I looked at Ma. She gave me the tiniest of smiles. I was a blessed child after that. I could do whatever I wanted. My father let me pursue all my dreams. I have gotten so far in life because of these scars. Are they really Kali Ma's blessings? I still remember the way Ma had smiled at me. I believe they are my Ma's doings, my Ma's blessings.
केसरिया call the Jaipur Literature Festival a living library, or perhaps even a library of life. Do join us as we share the excitement of ideas and of debate and dialogue, of the adventures of science, of the joys of poetry and music, the consolations of philosophy, the sense of literature and of life.
So much about the festival in India, the scale of it, the energy of it, and I just love the fact that there is this effort to bring it to other cities in the world.
It's a variety of topics. It's meaningful. I'm just excited. I'm feeling like I've learned a lot to think about, and I appreciate JLF coming here.
Going forward, it would be a very good thing to do for the community to have this event on an annual basis.
I think that when you hear so many different voices and perspectives about the South Asian diaspora and many other issues, you learn that there's a lot of history that you're not taught every day, and I think that that's important to bring in today's world.
I was actually really surprised by the camaraderie I experienced here and the way that people at JLF, both attendees and other panelists, seem to really connect profoundly to literature and care about it.
In 2020, our live version of JLF has been laid to waste because of COVID-19. However, nothing's going to stop us from coming in the way of bringing our writers and speakers to you in Boulder, Colorado, Houston, New York, and Toronto, Canada.
Teamwork Arts, bringing India to the world and the world to India through Indian art and culture for over 30 years. One of Teamwork Arts' signature events, the Z Jaipur Literature Festival, is the world's largest free festival of its kind. With daily interactive sessions, lively debate and dialogue, and international music performances every night, it's no wonder the festival attracts over 500,000 visitors a year. The Jaipur Bookmark, an international B2B event for the publishing industry, happens during the Z Jaipur Literature Festival and sees a confluence of publishers, writers, and literary agents. Teamwork Arts, producers of the Z Jaipur Literature Festival, have taken the flavor of the festival to international shores with vibrant events in the UK, Australia, and the US. Teamwork Arts takes India's artistic diversity to the world with almost 12 festivals of India across continents in a stunning array in over 40 cities. A feast for the senses, these are spectacles of dance, music, cinema, theatre, literature, and so much more. In each of these places, Teamwork Arts' colourful festivals of India are the high points of the annual cultural calendars, be it Confluence in Australia, India by the Bay in Hong Kong, India by the Nile in Egypt, Ion India in Chicago, Shared History in South Africa, India in the Sunshine City in Zimbabwe, Edinburgh Fringe Festival, Kala Utsavam in Singapore, Sarang in South Korea, festivals in Abu Dhabi, Shanghai, Sweden. The list is dizzying. The Jazz India Circuit is an endeavour by Teamwork Arts to spread the word and sound of jazz across the country. The 2017-18 season, 4 festivals across 3 cities featuring over 25 stellar artists from India and around the world, including Jojo Mayer and Nerve, drummer-singer Jameson Ross, and Dave Weckl, who collaborated with the talented Mohini Day. The Mahindra Kabira Festival celebrates the spirit, lyric and verse of the 15th century mystic poet Kabir in his birthplace, the historic city of Varanasi. Kabir's poetry is about inclusiveness. Mahindra Kabira brings to music lovers an unforgettable experience of listening to leading exponents of the classical Banaras Gharana and rich folk traditions of music on the legendary banks of the mighty river Ganges, along with sessions on art and literature, specially curated walks with famous local residents and delectable local cuisine. Sacred celebrates the spiritual through music and its ability to heal. International artists collaborate with world music exponents from India amongst the most incredible desert settings on the banks of the Pushkar Lake. Heritage walks, meditation, talks and workshops are part of this weekend experience.